They say every tragedy has a sound. For me, it wasn't the sirens or the crash or the rain that night, okay? It was the silence that followed. Yeah, that kind of silence that crawls into your bones when the world still spins but yours stops. It's strange how quickly a life can change. One moment, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, reading an article about brake failures in newer cars. The next, I was standing on the side of a wet highway, watching what was left of my wife's car smolder beneath flashing red and blue lights. Claire Miller, 32 years old, a trauma nurse who spent her nights saving lives and lost hers in a blink. They called it an accident, but I've spent too many years as a detective to believe in coincidences that neat. The night it happened, it was raining hard, the kind of cold, relentless rain that makes every light blur like a bad dream. Claire was coming home late from her shift at Mercy General. She texted me around accident.But PM, on my way, exhausted, can't wait to just sleep forever. Yeah, she used to say things like that, dark humor after a 12-hour shift. I never thought those would be the last words I'd ever read from her. And when the call came at Surstar, I thought it was the hospital again, another emergency, another case. Instead, it was a dispatcher's voice I didn't recognize. Mr. Miller, there's been an accident. By the time I reached the scene, the paramedics were already covering her body with a white sheet. I remember the smell of gasoline mixing with rain. I remember the taste of metal in my mouth. But what I remember most was that her car had stopped against the guardrail barely 30 feet from the intersection. If her brakes failed, why wasn't there a single skid mark? In the following days, everything moved in slow motion. Statements, condolences, funeral arrangements, I'd barely heard any of it. Friends came and went like ghosts, dropping words like tragedy and fate and she's in a better place. But I couldn't stop replaying that night, the missing dash cam, the one I'd installed myself last Christmas, the report that said faulty brake line, even though her car had just passed inspection 2 weeks prior. The blood work that listed a Lingdartling alcohol level, even though Claire hadn't touched a drop of alcohol in years. The little things, details, the kind of details that make detectives lose sleep. I went back to the crash site 3 times. Each time I found something that made even less sense. The road had been washed clean by rain, but at the base of the guardrail, I found tiny glass shards that didn't match her car's headlights. A second vehicle had been there, close enough to shatter a taillight, but when I checked the police photos, those fragments were gone. I took the report to my former captain, Mark Dalton, the man I'd trusted with my career, my life, my friend, and he'd been like an older brother to me for years. He'd taught me how to read suspects, how to lie convincingly, how to let the truth breathe. And when I walked into his office, he stood and hugged me. "Ryan, I'm so damn sorry," he said. "Claire was. She was one of the good ones." I nodded, silent. He gestured for me to sit. "I've been looking through the reports myself," he continued, eyes dropping to the papers I'd brought. "I know what you're thinking, but it was a freak accident. You've got to let it go." Let it go. That phrase burned like acid because the way he said it wasn't sympathy, it was warning. The next night, I sat alone in Claire's old car parked in our driveway. The seat still smelled faintly like her perfume. I opened the glove compartment looking for her insurance papers and found something I hadn't noticed before. A small silver flash drive taped beneath the upper shelf. Inside were 6 voice memos. The first few were ordinary, her leaving reminders for herself, but the last one was different. It was recorded just 2 days before she died. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "Mark's been acting strange lately. He keeps calling me after shifts, asking if Ryan's home. I shouldn't have picked up. I don't know what I've done, but I think I made a mistake. That was it." And no context, no follow-up, just a sentence that changed everything I believed. I didn't sleep that night. And I sit on the floor, surrounded by her things, the flash drive, her phone, the accident photos, the autopsy report. The pieces didn't fit. They weren't supposed to. The next morning, I went to the evidence locker at the precinct, flashing my old badge just long enough for the clerk to think I was still authorized. The case file was already sealed, ordered by Captain Dalton, she said. That was the moment I stopped being a grieving husband and started being a detective again. For 2 weeks, I worked in silence. I cross-checked phone records. I traced bank statements. I watched hours of surveillance footage from gas stations and traffic cams. Most of it was nothing, but then at accident.But PM on the night of the crash, a blurry license plate flashed across one camera just half a mile from the site. Now, Dalton's car, it wasn't proof, but it was enough to make me feel something I hadn't felt in months. Purpose. I tried to confront him once more, in the precinct parking lot. He laughed it off, said grief was twisting my mind, that I should see a therapist. But when I mentioned the flash drive, his expression changed, his jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward his office windows, as if someone might be listening. Ryan, he said softly, if you dig into this, you'll regret it. Some things are better left buried. And he patted my shoulder and walked away. That touch, that casual, dismissive pat, made my skin crawl. And I stood there for a long time after he left, staring at my reflection in the car window. Again, I didn't look like a detective anymore. I looked like a man being erased. That night, I poured myself a drink, the first in months, and played her final voice memo again. Her voice cracked on the word mistake. She wasn't talking about guilt. She was talking about fear. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, Mark Dalton had been in love with her, maybe for years, and when she tried to end it, he ended her instead. The next morning, I handed in my badge. The department called it compassionate leave, and they didn't know I had no intention of coming back. I left my home, my city, and everything that used to define me, but I didn't leave the past behind. I carried it with me, every photo, every report, every unanswered question. They said Claire's death was an accident. But I knew better because when a man like Mark Dalton tells you to let something go, it's only because he's terrified you'll hold on. And I planned to hold on until I strangled the truth out of him. The Widow's Witness, narrated in the first-person voice of Ryan Miller, grief changes shape with time. At first it's loud, crying, screaming, breaking things that can't scream back. Then it becomes quiet, patient, deliberate. That's where I was now. In a rented apartment 2 towns over, surrounded by files I wasn't supposed to have, I spent my nights trying to breathe meaning into the chaos. Every page smelled like gasoline and rain. Every photograph felt heavier than paper should. Dalton thought I'd walked away. That was his mistake. I still had Claire's phone. I'd told everyone it was destroyed in the crash, but the truth sat in my drawer. Screen cracked, battery swollen, waiting to speak. I paid a tech to pull whatever fragments he could. Messages, call logs, location pings. 3 numbers stood out, one marked private, another saved as MD, and a third with no contact name repeating in the weeks before she died. The private number traced back to a motel on the edge of town. Room, stir receipts showed it rented twice a week for almost 3 months. I told myself there had to be another explanation. She could have been helping a patient, maybe volunteering. Claire always helped people, but the lie didn't survive long. The motel clerk remembered her immediately. Pretty brunette, medical scrubs sometimes, always paid cash. Same guy with her most nights, tall shaved head, badge clipped to his belt, my stomach turned, Dalton, I drove home with my hands shaking on the wheel. Every mile felt like another piece of my old life cracking apart. At home, I opened her laptop, the one I'd been avoiding since the funeral. Inside the browser history were searches that shouldn't have been there. Signs of emotional manipulation. How to end an affair safely. Anonymous counseling for workplace relationships. Each search punched a hole deeper in my chest. She'd been trapped and she hadn't known how to tell me. I waited a week before facing him. Long enough for the anger to boil into something cold. Habrake. He was in his office, polishing a plaque from the mayor, smiling that easy smile everyone trusted. When he saw me, the smile stiffened. Ryan, he said, cautious. Didn't expect. I dropped the motel photo on his desk. His eyes flicked down, then up again. A pause. Just long enough for me to see the truth slip across his face. You're letting grief twist you, he said finally. You're better than this, was she? I asked quietly. That broke the mask for half a second. His jaw flexed, the corner of his mouth tightening into something almost like pity. Then he stood, walked to the door, and closed it. I loved her, he said, voice low. Maybe not the way you wanted me to, but she chose me, Ryan. And you were too married to the badge to see what she needed. The words didn't make me angry. They hollowed me out. He stepped closer, lowering his tone even further. She's gone. There's nothing to win here. If you keep digging, I'll have internal affairs on you before the week's out. You understand? It wasn't a threat shouted across a room. It was whispered from inches away, a predator's warning. Mucking. He straightened his tie, smiled again, and opened the door. Take care of yourself, detective. I walked out without a word. Gurkha. The hall seemed longer than it used to, every fluorescent light flickering like a heartbeat. Outside, the air smelled like rain again. I drove aimlessly for hours, past the diner where she used to wait for me after shifts, past the bridge where we once watched fireworks. Every memory hurt differently. By midnight, I parked outside the motel room. Shurar's window was dark, curtains drawn. I sat there until dawn, watching it, trying to imagine what they said to each other in that room, trying to imagine when she realized she was in danger. When the sun came up, I felt something inside me settle, not calm, but clarity. Dalton thought he'd buried the evidence under sympathy and rank. He was wrong. I sold the house, packed what mattered into 2 boxes, left the badge, the uniform, the city behind. Everyone believed I'd finally broken, that the guilt had driven me away, but I wasn't running, I was preparing. I took jobs that didn't ask questions, night security, digital archiving, private background checks, anything that gave me access to data, to tools. I learned how to trace bank transfers through shell companies, how to spoof locations, how to disappear from public records without vanishing completely. And every night, before I shut the lights, I listened to that last recording of Claire whispering that she'd made a mistake. By the time a year had passed, the grief had sharpened into something surgical. Dalton had promoted himself into a corner, chief of police, face on every billboard about integrity and service. He'd built his kingdom on a coffin. He just didn't know yet that the coffin had teeth. The first step wasn't confrontation, it was infection, anonymous letters to journalists hinting at discrepancies in his department's budget, and data leaks showing minor irregularities, enough to spark curiosity, not enough to trace, rumors about affairs, favoritism, secret accounts. I watched from a distance as his smile began to strain in public photos. He was still untouchable, but I could see the first cracks forming. Every empire falls the same way from the inside, and I had just started to dig through the foundation. Ryan's pulse pounded in his ears. Did he give a name? He asked sharply. Vince shook his head. Only said he was with some company, State Line Insurance. I think Ryan frowned. Claire's policy was with SafeSure, not State Line. He didn't wait for a reply. Without another word, he pushed through the door, the sound echoing behind him like a closing chapter. Moments later, Ryan stood inside the police evidence department. The air smelled faintly of old paper and dust. He pulled out his old badge, still polished, still respected in the right circles. I need to review the Miller case files, he said evenly. The clerk shifted uncomfortably. That case has been sealed, Ryan. You know how it works? Ryan leaned a little closer, lowering his voice. Then you won't mind if I just take a look at what's public record. Ryan didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study, staring at the flickering glow of Claire's photo on his desk, the one from their anniversary trip to the Rockies. Her smile looked real, effortless, something that now felt like fiction. Morning sunlight bled through the curtains, pale and cold. Ryan had already gone through the crash file twice, each time circling the same question marks: the missing dash cam, the unreported witness, the blood report that screamed fabrication. But something new gnawed at him now: the service records of the car. Claire's Subaru had been taken for maintenance just 3 days before the accident, at a garage recommended by Mark Dalton himself. Ryan drove to that same garage, an old auto shop tucked behind an industrial strip in Aurora. The owner, Vince Carver, greeted him with grease-stained hands and a forced smile. Ryan had seen that smile too many times before, the kind people wear when they're hiding something. Morning, Ryan said flatly. You serviced my wife's car about a week ago, Claire Miller. Vince froze for a fraction of a second, then nodded too quickly. Yeah, I remember her. Nice lady. What about it? Ryan's eyes didn't blink. You replaced her brake lines, right? Sure did. Rust damage. They were in bad shape, so we swapped him out. Standard job. Ryan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Then how did she die from brake failure 3 days later? Vince's hand twitched. Hey, I don't know what you're implying. Ryan cut him off. I'm implying someone tampered with her car after you fixed it. Maybe even here in this garage. Vince swallowed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the only sound between them. Look, Vince said finally, I don't know anything. She came in, we fixed it, that's it. Ryan's tone hardened. I used to be a detective, Vince. I can read people. You're sweating, your pupils are blown, and your foot's been tapping for the last 30 seconds. You do know something. So here's what's going to happen. You either tell me what you're hiding, or I dig until I find it. And when I do, I'll make sure you wish you'd talked. And Vince broke, his voice trembled. Okay, listen. A guy came by the next morning, said he was from your insurance company, showed credentials, signed off on the work order. He asked to double-check the brake assembly, said it was for record accuracy. I let him into the bay. He worked on it for maybe 20 minutes. When I came back, he was gone. An uneasy pause, then a reluctant nod. The evidence bin arrived, small, underwhelming. Ryan sifted through a phone, a piece of shattered taillight, a blood report, and a USB-labeled scene photos. But something was missing, the black box data. Every modern vehicle had one. The report referenced it, but the data itself wasn't there. He scanned the evidence log. The black box had been signed out 3 weeks ago by Captain Mark Dalton. Ryan froze. A chill ran down his spine. The handwriting was unmistakable. Your Sefton Pripsis. That evening, Ryan drove homes. That evening, Ryan drove home in silence, replaying every memory with Mark in reverse. The nights they spent drinking after long shifts, the way Mark had comforted him at the funeral, the way he said let it go. But now Ryan could see what he'd missed. Mark's pity had been performative. His tone, his phrasing, all designed to steer him away from the truth. That night, Ryan poured himself a drink for the first time since Claire's death. Not to forget, but to remember everything. Caca. He sat by the window as rain streaked the glass, watching headlights blur through the storm. His mind wandered back to one specific memory, 6 months before the crash. Claire had confided in him that she'd overheard something at the hospital. Something about Mark. She said she'd tell him once she was sure. She never did. Ryan exhaled slowly. That was it, the missing piece. Whatever Claire had discovered about Mark, it had gotten her killed. The next morning, he broke into the police database using an old backdoor account. He searched for Dalton's recent activity, travel logs, communications, phone records. What he found made his stomach turn. 2 days before Claire's accident, Mark had approved a sealed warrant, one Ryan had never seen. The subject? Claire Miller. The charge, possession of evidence in an ongoing corruption case. Ryan's breath caught. Claire had found something, and Mark had moved fast to silence her. He scrolled through attached notes, heavily redacted, but one line was legible. Subject aware of internal misconduct. Eliminate liability. Ryan closed the laptop, heart pounding. The truth was now undeniable. His wife had been murdered, not by fate, but by the man who once called him brother. And now that man was going to pay. He wasn't ready yet, but soon he would be. He needed evidence, he needed patience, and above all, he needed Mark to believe he'd moved on. Ryan picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. Mark, he said, forcing calm into his voice. You were right. I've been losing it. I need to talk. Over a drink? Mark hesitated, chuckled softly. Glad to hear you're coming around, brother. Sure. Let's grab one tomorrow. Ryan smiled faintly. Tomorrow it is. He ended the call, staring into the darkness. The hunter had just become the prey. Ryan arrived early, and the bar sat on the edge of town. An old brick place with creaking floors and low amber lights. The kind of spot where cops came to forget their sins. He picked the corner booth, the same one where he and Mark had shared countless drinks back when they were partners. Back when trust was still a currency they both believed in. He ordered bourbon, neat. First sip burned, but it was grounding, a reminder of what it felt like to be alive with purpose again. The rain outside had turned steady, soft against the windows. He checked his watch. Mark was late, typical. When Mark finally walked in, he looked exactly the same, clean-cut, composed, every inch the respected captain. But Ryan could see the cracks now, the tension behind his smile, the calculation in his eyes. It wasn't the face of a friend anymore. It was the face of a man who'd gotten away with something and thought he always would. Ryan, Mark said warmly, clapping him on the shoulder. Good to see you, man. You look better. Ryan smiled faintly. Yeah, trying to keep busy. They sat, ordered another round, talked about meaningless things, football, old cases, department gossip, the usual small talk that served as camouflage for everything they weren't saying. Then Ryan leaned back, glass in hand. I've been thinking about that night, he said casually. Claire's accident. Mark's expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered. Just a flash. You still on that, huh? Ryan, I told you I know, Ryan interrupted softly. You told me to let it go, and I'm trying. But something's been eating at me. Thought maybe you could help me clear it up. Mark set his drink down, voice tight. Like what? Ryan shrugged. Her car had just been serviced 3 days before the crash. Funny thing is, the shop said someone from an insurance company came by after that, someone who doesn't exist. Now, Mark's jaw flexed slightly. You're chasing ghosts, Ryan. He took another sip. But you remember that sealed warrant from last spring, the one you said was a clerical mix-up? The one with my wife's name on it? Mark froze for half a heartbeat, then leaned forward. Where did you hear about that? Ryan smiled faintly. I still have friends in records. Guess they missed you during cleanup. Mark's voice hardened. That was nothing, Ryan. Routine cross-check. You know how this works. Ryan's tone dropped an octave. No, Mark, I don't think it was routine. Because the file said she was a liability. That word doesn't come up in paperwork unless someone's trying to make a problem disappear. The silence that followed was thick enough to suffocate. Then Mark leaned back and gave a slow, practiced laugh. You've been out too long, brother. You're seeing patterns where there aren't any. Ryan nodded slowly, pretending to agree. Yeah, maybe you're right. He raised his glass in a mock toast. To old times, then. Mark smiled again. That politician's smile he wore like armor. To old times, they drank. But as Mark talked about his promotion, Ryan's mind drifted to the small recorder hidden under the table, capturing every word. He wasn't expecting a confession tonight, not yet. This was reconnaissance, a test of how far Mark would go to protect his lie. When they finally parted, Mark offered the same friendly pat on the shoulder, the same hollow sympathy. "You'll get through this, Ryan. Just let it rest." Ryan nodded. "I'm trying." "Okay." He watched Mark walk away, disappearing into the rain, but the moment the door closed, Ryan's expression shifted. The mask dropped, his eyes went cold. Recaffins. He played back the recording in his car, nothing incriminating yet, but the hesitation, the defensive tone, the false laughter, it was all evidence. He just needed one slip, one contradiction, and the whole thing would unravel. Still, Ryan knew Mark wouldn't fall easily. The man was careful, methodical. If he'd killed Claire, he hadn't done it himself, which meant there was someone else, a name he hadn't uncovered yet. That night, Ryan dug deeper. He hacked into the department's internal comm logs, tracing any contact between Mark and outside contractors around the time of the crash. At r/ta.m, he found it, a deleted entry restored through the system's shadow cache. A single call, routed through a burner number, lasting 5 minutes. The recipient, Vincent Carver. Ryan stared at the screen. The same mechanic who had serviced Claire's car. Everything clicked. Mark had sent someone to inspect the vehicle after the service, someone who made sure the brakes would fail just when Claire hit the downhill turn outside their neighborhood. It wasn't random, it was orchestrated, but Ryan wasn't going to the police. He knew how Mark operated. The man had friends in every department, favors owed in every corner of the city. Going through official channels would only bury the truth deeper. This had to be personal, precise, controlled. Okay, so Ryan called in a favor of his own, someone from his past. The next morning, in a quiet diner off the interstate, a man sat waiting. Heavy-set, mid-40s, with tattooed knuckles and eyes that had seen too many bad nights. Ryan slid into the booth across from him. "Didn't think I'd ever see you again," the man said. "Didn't think I'd need to," Ryan replied. "Who's the target?" "Didn't think I'd need to," Ryan replied. Who's the target?" Ryan slid a photo across the table. "Mark Dalton, smiling in a police uniform. I want him ruined before he even knows he's being hunted." "Kah." The man studied the photo, then grinned. "You still pay like the old days?" Ryan's voice was calm. "Better." The deal was set. Ryan didn't want blood, not yet. He wanted exposure, humiliation. He wanted Mark's world to crumble piece by piece until the man begged for mercy that would never come. Okay? As Ryan left the diner, he looked up at the rising sun. For the first time in months, he felt something stir in his chest. Not peace, not closure, purpose. Mark had stolen his wife, his faith, his life. Now Ryan would take everything from him, one careful move at a time. The following weeks unfolded like a quiet storm, invisible to most, yet powerful enough to shift the ground beneath Mark Dalton's feet. Ryan moved in the shadows, methodical, patient, and colder than he'd ever been when wearing the badge. He started with the smallest fracture points, the places where Mark's image was most fragile. Reputation, finances, trust. Those were the foundations of a man like Dalton, and Ryan knew exactly how to erode them. He and his contact, the man from the diner, Cole Bennett, had set up a series of digital traps. Cole was an expert in digital forensics, a former cybercrimes officer who'd been forced out of the force after one too many gray area tactics. Ryan had once helped him escape a career-ending indictment. Now Cole was paying the debt. It began by leaking small, believable pieces of information, an anonymous tip to Internal Affairs suggesting mismanagement of evidence funds under Dalton's watch. A second tip alleging that he'd accepted a bribe to bury a weapons charge. It wasn't enough to accuse him. It was enough to make people wonder. By the end of the first week, whispers had started to circulate inside the department. Mark could feel the shift, the glances that lingered a little too long, the conversations that stopped when he walked by. Then, on a quiet Wednesday morning, the first real crack appeared. A local journalist, a woman named Sarah Kane, published an article citing anonymous sources claiming that Captain Mark Dalton was under investigation for procedural misconduct. It was worded carefully, legally, but it was enough to spark fire. The department scrambled to issue a denial, but the seed had been planted. Ryan watched it all unfold from his laptop, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at his lips. Every piece was moving exactly as planned. That evening, Mark called him. "Ryan, you seeing this crap online? Some idiot's trying to drag my name through the mud." Ryan kept his tone calm, even sympathetic. "Yeah, I saw. You think it's someone in the department? Has to be. Probably some rookie with a grudge." Don't worry, I'll find out who's behind it. Ryan said nothing, just let the silence hang. Anyway, Mark continued, you doing okay? You sounded better last time. Getting there, Ryan replied. One day at a time. When the call ended, Ryan sat in darkness for a long while. He didn't enjoy this, not in the way most people think of revenge. It wasn't satisfaction he felt. It was control. After months of helplessness, he was steering the wheel again, but he wasn't done yet. And 2 nights later, Cole sent him a text, got something big. They met at an abandoned rail yard, one of their old stakeout spots from years back. Cole arrived with a USB drive and a grin that meant trouble. I hacked into the encrypted section of the department servers, he said. Guess what our boy's been hiding? Yeah, Ryan took the drive, show me. Cole plugged it into his laptop, scrolling through folders. Dalton's got a slush fund tied to a shell company, Mason Strategic Holdings. Used it for operational expenses, but the withdrawals don't match up with any case records. Ryan's eyes narrowed. How much? About 200 grand over the last 3 years? And get this, one of the wire transfers went out the day before Claire's accident. To a man named Vince Carver. Ryan felt a cold, burning silence fill his chest. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. Cole leaned back. You gonna take this to the press? Ryan shook his head slowly. No. Not yet. I want him to feel the walls closing in first. Then I'll take everything. The next phase was psychological. Ryan started planting reminders. Things only Mark would recognize. And a photograph slipped under his office door. A shot of Claire smiling beside her Subaru. No note, no message, just the image. A voicemail left from a blocked number, 3 seconds of silence, followed by the faint sound of screeching tires. A text message. You should have checked the brakes yourself, Mark began to unravel. He started leaving the office early, drinking more, snapping at his subordinates. Ryan watched from afar, patient and relentless. Every movement, every reaction, all documented, all recorded. He wanted Mark paranoid, he wanted him sleepless, he wanted him desperate enough to make a mistake. That mistake came sooner than expected. One afternoon, Cole intercepted a deleted message from Mark's phone, a call to Vince Carver. The transcript was short, frantic, Rark, you said it was clean, Vince. No trace. Now I've got reporters sniffing around, IA crawling up my ass, VINCE. I didn't say anything, man. I swear. Mark, if this comes back to me, you're done. You hear me? Done. Ryan listened to the recording over and over, the sound of Mark's voice unraveling piece by piece. It wasn't a confession, not yet, but it was a thread, and Ryan knew exactly how to pull it. He arranged a meeting with Vince under false pretenses. Pretended to be a lawyer representing an anonymous whistleblower fund, offering immunity in exchange for information about police corruption. Vince showed up at a motel off the interstate, jumpy, sweating, chain-smoking. Ryan stepped out from the shadows, watching recognition dawn on the man's face. Ryan, Jesus, you? Ryan didn't smile. We need to talk about my wife. Vince backed up, eyes darting toward the door. I didn't touch her car. I just followed orders, man. Whose orders? Dalton's. He said it was just a setup that nobody would get hurt. Just wanted to scare her, make her back off. But something went wrong, okay? The car wasn't supposed to crash. Ryan's voice was like steel, and you believed that? Vince's hands trembled. I swear, man, he paid me off. Told me if I ever talked, he'd pin it all on me. I didn't mean for her to die. Ryan stepped closer, eyes cold. You didn't mean for her to die, but you took the money anyway. Vince's mouth opened, but no words came out. Ryan left him there, shaking. He didn't need a confession. He had enough. That night, Ryan sent the recorded audio to Cole with one line attached. Crow, prepare the drop. The plan was simple. In G-Star hours, Cole would release every file, every transaction, every recording to the media, but not before Ryan delivered one final message to the man who thought he'd buried the truth. He wanted to look Mark Dalton in the eyes when his empire burned. The clock was ticking. And this time, Ryan wasn't just chasing ghosts, he was the ghost. Ryan spent the next 72 hours preparing for the end, not his, but Mark Dalton's. Everything was set in motion, the leaks, the press files, the recordings, even the offshore transfers linking Mark to Vince Carver. But Ryan knew Mark. The man was a fighter, cornered animals always were. Before he fell, he'd lash out. So Ryan had to control how the story ended. He wanted to be there when the truth detonated. He wanted Mark to see the face of the man he thought he'd broken. That night, the city was quiet, heavy with rain again, just like the night Claire died. Ryan stood outside Mark's sprawling 2-story home, engine idling low. Through the window, he could see him pacing the living room, phone pressed to his ear, the glow of television light flickering against his face. The perfect picture of a man whose life was slipping through his fingers. Cola's voice came through Ryan's earpiece. Everything's live in 30 minutes. Once it hits, the press will tear him apart. You sure you want to be there when it happens? Ryan's eyes stayed locked on the window. I need to see it, Cole sighed. You always did like the front row seat. Can't keep the timer running, Ryan said, cutting the line. He stepped out of the car and walked through the rain. Every footstep a memory of what Mark had stolen, every drop a whisper of Claire's voice. When he reached the door, he didn't knock. He used the old service key from the department days. Mark had never changed the locks. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Mark turned the corner, startled, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. Relax, Ryan said evenly, stepping into the light. If I wanted you dead, you'd already be gone. Knock-hand, Mark's eyes narrowed. What the hell are you doing here? Ryan looked around the room, the framed commendations, the polished trophies, the portrait of a man who'd built a life on lies. Just visiting, and before things get messy, what are you talking about? Ryan met his gaze. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Senseption for you spherdidred. What I'm talking about, Mark scoffed, forcing a laugh. Jesus, Ryan. You're still on that? You're losing it, man. Ryan took another step forward, lowering his voice. Claire found something, didn't she? Something that tied you to the corruption fund. She confronted you, and you panicked. So you paid Vince to scare her, only it didn't go as planned. Mark's expression hardened. You've got no proof, Ryan tilted his head. Don't I? He tossed a small recorder onto the coffee table. Mark hesitated before pressing play. Vince's trembling voice filled the room. He said it was just to scare her, not kill her. I didn't mean for her to die. Silence. Mark stood frozen, the color draining from his face. Where did you get that? Ryan's voice was cold and steady. I used to be a detective. You taught me how to dig. Mark's breathing quickened. He looked around like a trapped animal, calculating exits, excuses, anything to hold his empire together. You don't know what you're doing, he snapped. If you leak that, you'll take the whole department down with me, people you worked with, people who trusted you. Ryan's stare didn't waver. Good, maybe they deserve to fall too. Mark's jaw clenched. You think this makes you better than me? You think Claire would have wanted this? Ryan's voice broke for the first time. Now I per by 100 ents. Ryan's voice broke for the first time. Claire wanted the truth, and you made sure she never got to speak it. Mark slammed his glass against the wall, shards exploding. You don't understand what you're playing with. There are bigger people involved. This doesn't end with me. Ryan stepped closer until their faces were inches apart. No, Mark, it does end with you. Cacking. The sound of his phone buzzing broke the silence. Mark's face turned pale. The first headline had gone live. Captain Mark Dalton implicated in cover-up, fraud investigation underway. His hands trembled. What did you do? Gave you the fame you always wanted, Ryan said quietly. Crow. Gave you the fame you always wanted, Ryan said quietly. The television behind him flickered to breaking news. The same story, spreading like wildfire. The camera zoomed in on Mark's official portrait as the anchor's voice droned. Sources claim internal evidence has surfaced linking Captain Dalton to multiple financial crimes and potential evidence tampering related to the death of Claire Miller. Mark turned slowly toward Ryan, eyes filled with something between rage and panic. You destroyed me. Gow. Ryan's reply was almost a whisper. A whisper. You destroyed yourself. Mark lunged, fast, desperate, but Ryan sidestepped, sending him crashing into the table. They struggled briefly. Two former brothers turned enemies until Ryan pinned him down. The years of buried grief poured out in a single, shaking breath. I trusted you, Ryan said through clenched teeth. I defended you, Mark laughed bitterly, even as he gasped for air. You think I wanted her dead? She was going to ruin everything. You don't know the kind of people behind that money, Ryan. I was protecting us both, Ryan froze. Protecting? She was going to expose them all, Mark hissed. The chief, the DA, they're all in it. She was going to make them pay, and they were never going to let her live. I did what I had to do. Ryan stared down at him, realization dawning like a dark sunrise. You killed her to protect yourself. Mark didn't answer. He didn't have to. Ryan stood up slowly, his expression unreadable. You always said the truth comes out eventually. Guess today's the day. He turned and walked to the door. Behind him, Mark shouted, voice breaking. You think this fixes anything? They'll come for you too, Ryan. You just lit a fire you can't put out. Ryan paused at the threshold, rain roaring outside. Then let them come. He walked out into the storm without looking back. By morning, it was everywhere. The scandal, the tapes, the collapse. Mark Dalton was suspended, pending criminal investigation. Vince Carver disappeared off the grid. The department scrambled to contain the fallout, but it was too late. The empire of corruption Mark helped build was burning from the inside out. Ryan watched it all unfold from his porch, coffee in hand, the sunrise bleeding through low clouds. For the first time since Claire's death, he could breathe, but peace wasn't what he felt. It was emptiness. A hollow victory carved out of grief and justice. Cole called that afternoon, "It's done. The system's eating itself." "You sure you're good?" Ryan looked out at the horizon. "Good, no, but it's over." Cole hesitated. "What'll you do now?" Ryan's eyes drifted to Claire's photo on the porch table, her smile still radiant, untouched by the darkness that followed. "What I should have done from the start," he said softly. "Disappear. Wying matting zuring strav malling zurs. Disappear." Cole didn't ask where. He didn't need to. Ryan hung up, left the phone on the table, and walked down the dirt road until the house disappeared behind him. Some ghosts don't vanish when you get justice, they just stop screaming. And as the rain faded, Ryan finally let the silence take him. The morning after the explosion was colder than usual. Colorado's sky had that strange, pale stillness that follows destruction, as if even the wind had paused to listen. Ryan stood at the edge of the charred cabin, his boots sinking into the half-frozen mud. Smoke still coiled from the blackened ruins like whispers of the dead. For a moment there was silence, just the slow creak of a half-burnt door swinging on its hinges. He didn't feel triumph, he didn't even feel relief, just an emptiness, deep, hollow, and strangely calm. Mark Dalton was gone. The cabin had exploded the moment Ryan had left, taking with it every shred of the empire that Mark had built, the blackmail recordings, the offshore documents, the money trail, everything. But that wasn't the real victory. The real victory came 10 minutes later when the news broke. Breaking: former police captain Mark Dalton and businessman Eric Sutton killed in explosion. Ongoing investigation suggests embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy tied to police evidence tampering. Sources claim the men were under federal watch. Ryan had written the confession himself. Every detail, every secret Mark had buried in shadows was now public record. He'd sent the files to 3 journalists and 2 FBI contacts before the explosion. Mark's legacy was erased, not by gunfire, not by vengeance, but by exposure. Ryan watched as the cabin's last wall crumbled into ash. The smell of burnt pine mixed with diesel hung heavy in the air. He closed his eyes and whispered, "You wanted control, Mark. Now you'll be remembered as the man who lost everything." 3 weeks passed. Ryan moved back into his quiet suburban home, the one that still smelled faintly of Claire's favorite vanilla candles. He'd fixed the front porch light, the one she always said flickered like a heartbeat. He spent his mornings at the lake now. No case files, no guns, just a notebook and the sound of water lapping against the shore, but peace never came easily. Every night he still saw flashes, the rain, the crash, Claire's last voicemail, and Mark's grin when he said, "Let it go." He knew closure was a lie. There's no real justice, only balance. That balance. One afternoon, Ryan received a letter, no return address, just a clean white envelope with his name typed neatly in the center. He opened it, half expecting some bureaucratic nonsense from the department, but inside was a single sheet of paper. It read, you missed one. Attached to it was a small photograph, a woman, blonde hair, gray eyes, standing outside a courthouse, Claire's old colleague from the hospital, Emily Kane. The same nurse who had filed the insurance claim paperwork. Ryan's pulse slowed. He flipped the paper over. A date was scribbled in blue ink, 2 weeks after Claire's crash, and a bank deposit slip, $500,000. And the realization hit like cold steel. Emily had been part of it. She wasn't just a bystander. She'd been the one who falsified Claire's medical report, the alcohol reading, the paperwork that made it all look like negligence. The seed of suspicion that had started it all had been planted by her. Ryan folded the paper neatly and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Outside, the sky had started to rain again, soft, rhythmic, like the night it all began. He stood there for a long time, staring at the photograph. Then, quietly, almost peacefully, he whispered, "Then the work isn't done."